Well, good afternoon, colleagues. Good morning and good evening to me. Thank you very much for joining us today in the session 2 of adaptive approaches to evaluation. And today, this session is on methods for learning adaptation in real time. We have here Jordi.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Nice seeing you again.
And Joseph.
Hello, good morning. A pleasure to be here with you.
Who, well, you know probably from the RBM developmental evaluation and also from obviously the previous training session, the introduction and session 1. And we will be delivering this training. If you recall, initially we did, in July, we did an introductory informative session. And with your feedback and your participation, we designed this phase 2, which are the technical sessions. So we are right at this point on phase 2, and here we're looking at having several sessions. We have 3 this year and 3 in the upcoming year, possibly February. And these are all the specific approaches, methods, techniques that we went through in the introductory session, and you gave us feedback on which ones were of more feasible or more interest or utility for you. Then we hope to move to a phase 3 this coming year, where with country offices, if you're interested in testing these methods or combinations of techniques, we would support you in undertaking the implementation and of these exercises. So, well, mostly that as an introduction. I don't know if Jordi and Joseph, you want to say anything else?
Yeah, thank you, Valeria. Well, just maybe to remind that the idea here is that those sessions we have curated, state-of-the-art knowledge on adaptive evaluation approaches, which are, of course, fitting this adaptive management movement in UNFPA. And the idea is that you go through the contents through the session today. There will be the recording. Jordi just sent the drive where you have all the materials. So the idea is that you take what you think is more interesting to you, you discern which are the approaches that may be more useful for you, for your work. And then in that phase 3 that Valeria mentioned, you start applying that, implementing that, and then in this phase 3, you can also count on our support while doing so. So that's the idea of those pills that we are organizing and having with you. So the agenda for today, we'll talk briefly about the context, and we'll focus especially on 3 approaches to learning and adaptation in real time. The first one is real-time evaluations. The second one is about developmental evaluation. And the third one is about adaptive inquiry frameworks. You will see that the 3 of them are also quite related. We will explain those interrelationships, and we will finish with a wrap-up and also explaining the following and next steps. So this is the frame that actually gives us the umbrella of what we are doing in these sessions that we call pills. It's the compass, it's the adaptive management model in UNFPA. You know that adaptive management is quite a new management approach that it's been rolling out. Compass is actually the brand that encompasses the 4 drivers of adaptation that are embedded into the program cycle. Those drivers of adaptation are leadership, collaboration, agility, and learning. And adaptive evaluation features actually those evaluation approaches that are fit for adaptive management. And that includes approaches, tools, methods that really enhance the ability of the organization to learn and adapt in complex environments. So that's, in a nutshell, the context in which we are having these sessions. And we are putting a lot of emphasis on the driver learning, because adaptive approaches to evaluation, specifically this one, are focused on learning in real time.
Yeah, so actually, this is a bit of a quick recap on pill number 1, which took place 2 weeks ago. Again, in the chat, we have just put the link to the Google Drive, and in the Google Drive, you will see one folder for each one of the pills. And once you enter into the folder, you have the slides, you have the materials, preparation materials, the materials for the session, and then the recording as well of the session. So this is what we saw in the previous session 2 weeks ago. This is a bit of a recap. Today we focus on methods for learning and adaptation in real time. 2 weeks ago, we focused on methods that foster evaluation use, because actually the use of evaluations is the main pillar of the UNFPA evaluation strategy. So there are several pillars. One is use, and the other one is making evaluation more adaptive and more agile. So the first day we looked at evaluation use, we looked at user engagement. We talk about steps that you can take in order to engage users and increase the engagement of users in evaluations, because we know that user engagement increases use. We also looked at timely feedback loops. Excuse me. Sorry, what happened? No. So we also looked at timely feedback loops. Can you see something happened with the presentation? Can you see the presentation?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, so we also saw the timely feedback loops, which are ways of providing feedback during an evaluation, and which also increases use. And we also look at emergence, which means what happens when you're doing evaluations in context that changes very rapidly, and you have a lot of input. How can you adapt the evaluation? This is what we saw in the first one. And today what we will see is methods that foster adaptation and learning in real time. So the first one that we will look at is real-time evaluation. And actually that was your number one interest. Actually, when we did that session that Valeria mentioned in July, there were two main interests. 100 people attended those informative sessions, and you said, we are mostly interested in use of evaluations and also in real time. So this is one of the aspects. Within real time, we will also talk about real-time learning, which is something that is coming up after the COVID pandemic. Real-time evaluation is turning into real-time learning, and we will tell you the state of the art of this situation and these methods. We also talk about developmental evaluation, because it's a type of real-time evaluation that is taking place increasingly in the UN system, and actually in UNFPA as well. As Valeria mentioned, Joseph and I and Valeria, we were involved in the first actually ever developmental evaluation in the UN system, which was about results-based management. It was a corporate evaluation. But then later on, ECARO, the regional office was interested in applying, and we also have an example from 2021 on developmental evaluation in ECARO. Valeria will present it today as an example. And then to finalize, to wrap up, we will talk about a technique which is called adaptive inquiry frameworks, that is very much linked to developmental evaluation and to timely feedback loops that we saw the other week. So then we can wrap up all these methods that have to do with making sure that evaluations fit decision makers in real time. And all this is within the utilization focused evaluation approaches that we talked about last week. So actually this is not besides evaluation use. These all have to do with evaluation use. Real-time evaluation are the type of evaluations that increase the use of findings in evaluations as well, and developmental evaluation. Okay, so we will first now talk about real-time evaluation. Here the ideas now for the next 20-25 minutes, Joseph and I will tell you about the what, the why, and the how of real-time evaluation. Then we will do a bit of a poll, and we will have a discussion. Then if you have any questions, we can also discuss any doubts of questions that you might have. So about real-time evaluation, the first is, okay, what do we mean by real-time evaluation? Real-time evaluation, as you can see when you look at the literature and the practitioners and the organizations in the UN that do real-time evaluation, you see that they put different emphasis on different aspects. So there is no one single definition. Some examples here you can find is WFP. They do conduct real-time evaluations, and they mention them as a type of evaluations where you present immediate feedback to primary intended users. So this is one of the aspects they emphasize. Then you also have ALNAP that they emphasize the fact that real-time evaluations, you support learning in action, actually. So you are learning as you are doing. ALNAP is the active learning network for accountability and performance for humanitarian aid sector. So ALNAP is the platform for the humanitarian sector. RTEs, according to OCHA, are carried out in the midst of an emergency operation. As you can see, real-time evaluations over the last 20 years have been mostly related to humanitarian action. But we will see how this is changing at the moment. You have UNHCR, one of the first ones that started using real-time evaluation in the UN system, that they see real-time evaluation as a rapid peer review carried out. So to them is a collective exercise, a real-time evaluation, and it's used to take corrective action in real time. So real time meaning when things are happening, not stopping and looking back at what happened 2 years ago, but while things are happening at that precise moment. And then you've got the INTRAC, which is the International NGO Training Research Center, that are starting to talk about real-time evaluation, not only in the humanitarian sector, but also in the development sector. And they see it as a methodology that provides immediate feedback to those planning or implementing. So here, it's not only that you observe things as they happen in real time, it's also that you provide feedback to decision makers in real time during the evaluation fieldwork. So you don't wait until the evaluation has finished to provide feedback. While you're doing the fieldwork, you are already feeding back. And as you can imagine, that's what happens in humanitarian situations where the decisions have to be taken very quickly. Okay. You have these in the preparation materials that Valeria sent you or that made available. We have this, if you don't have much time and you want to get a quick, rapid overview of what real-time evaluation is, we have this 2-pager from INTRAC, from the International NGO Training and Research Center, and you can read that in 3 minutes. And it's a bit of a summary of what real-time evaluation is. More about real-time evaluation. In the humanitarian sector, ALNAP, which is this active learning network for accountability and performance in the humanitarian sector, they provide guides for real-time evaluations in humanitarian action. Yeah, and they emphasize in those guides, there are 2. We will present you the guides and they are part of the materials for this training. They emphasize 2 elements of real-time evaluation. And one is that the primary objective is to provide feedback in a participatory way during the evaluation fieldwork. So feedback as things happen, yeah, to the decision makers. And the second one is that you do the evaluation as the operation unfolds. So as the humanitarian operation to them, in our case, would be as your intervention unfolds. So it's evaluating as you go and providing feedback as you go. So these are the 2 basic ideas that make for real-time evaluation, is that you evaluate as the intervention is happening, you observe it. Yeah, you do not only look forward prospectively or look backward, which is what happens in traditional summative evaluations. You looked and assess criteria as things are happening. And once then you get the evidence for those criteria that you assess, you immediately feed back as you have the data and the findings to decision making. You don't wait. You don't wait 2 months, produce a report and then feedback. It's as you have the data, you feedback. And that in the humanitarian field happens in a participatory way. This is a very important point. Okay, in humanitarian action, those findings then are shared in a process of sense making. We will look at that in a second. Actually, the Global Evaluation Initiative, from which UNFPA is also part, the Global Evaluation Initiative commissioned a paper, a study, to Patricia Rogers. She's a very well-known evaluator in the framework of Better Evaluation, which is a platform of practitioners in evaluation. Okay, now this Better Evaluation Network, it's part of the Global Evaluation Initiative. And they, in 2020, they commissioned a study to this person to see what was actually real-time evaluation, because it was increasing a lot. Yeah, with the COVID and even before the pandemic, real-time evaluation was moving outside of the humanitarian sector and into the development sector. So actually they commissioned a paper saying, okay, what do we mean by real-time evaluation? Because we know what it is in the humanitarian sector, but what about elsewhere? So here is this document, this paper. It is cited and referenced everywhere. So it's a very seminal paper on what is real-time evaluation and how it links to adaptive management. So it's a part of a working series on monitoring and evaluation for adaptive management. And the main message of Patricia Rogers, after she did all the review of everything that has been done in real-time evaluation over the last 20 years, is that there are different definitions of what is real-time evaluation, depending on the agencies, as we have seen in the first slide. But most definitions of what is real-time evaluation include one or more of these features. So there are 5 key features that you can see in all real-time evaluations, or in some of them. That is, as we mentioned, the real-time data collection, the real-time feedback or reporting, then real-time evaluations happening at different points in time, not only at the end, or because they happen during the intervention, they happen at different points in time. They support different types of learning. And here we will explain to you what are these single loop, double loop, and triple loop learning, which is the link between evaluation and learning. Okay, and these concepts are more and more used. Several donors already talk, like FCDO, the UK government, they talk about single loop learning and double loop learning and incorporate that in evaluation. And then the 5th feature is the fact that there is quite a lot of engagement and sense making in order to share the findings in real-time evaluations. There are exercises that include sense making and engaging different users together to analyze the finding. Here you have one of the tables that appear in this paper from Patricia Rogers. Here you have these 5 characteristics I just mentioned on the left. Then on the right hand side, you have a bit of a description of what these features mean. And then in the middle, which is a very interesting column, you have the problem that actually real-time evaluations solve in relation to conventional evaluation. So what conventional evaluations cannot do that then real-time evaluation can do. The first one, as we saw, is real-time data collection. So the real-time evaluation is undertaken during implementation as the implementation unfolds. So actually this solves the problem that we sometimes have, that we lack documentation on what is happening during implementation, or the documentation might be outdated. Yeah, when you don't have real-time monitoring or intent monitoring systems and mechanisms, you don't know what's going on. So actually real-time evaluation is a way to get real-time data on what is happening, not only in terms of activities, but mostly in terms of how your intervention works and outcomes. The second feature is, we already mentioned it as well, that RTEs, real-time evaluations, include rapid feedback as the data is part of the field visit. So as you collect the data, you immediately feedback. Okay, and this solves one of the problems that traditional or as characteristics rather than a problem that conventional evaluations have, is that usually there is a debrief maybe at the end of data collection, but there is a delay between the collection of the data and the evaluation report. Here, this happens real time. That is why it's called real-time evaluation. Another characteristic of real-time evaluation is that you do it at different, or some agencies, they do it at different points in time. With traditional evaluation, usually we have midterm evaluations and end of project evaluations or exposed. So real-time evaluations, you might do it several times during the life of an intervention at several points. So that's the multiple timings or multiple cycles of evaluation activity. Then real-time evaluations, the ones that are being conducted in the humanitarian sector, they focus on the 3 loops of learning, the single loop learning, double loop learning, and triple loop learning. Now, Joseph will explain you what this is, because this loop learning is the link between, as I said, evaluation and learning. But essentially, single loop learning, you look at deviations. Yeah, when we look at deviations, activities from results, how we are deviating, this is called single loop learning. Double loop learning is looking at how things work, at the assumptions of your theory of change. And triple loop learning is looking at how you learn, learning how to learn. Okay, so actually real-time evaluations are a methodology and a type of evaluation that enables you to dig deeper into these 3 types of loop learning. That's why it's useful. Whenever donors ask you for double loop learning, triple loop learning, real-time evaluation could be a way to answer to that call. And then the 5th element is engagement. Real-time evaluations imply engagement when it comes to share the findings. Actually, usually in real-time evaluations, the experience from the humanitarian sector is that recommendations usually are developed together, because humanitarian action happens in coherence with several agencies, different organizations. That's why, and together with the final beneficiaries, this is one of the aspects that we have in real-time evaluation. Joseph, now if you would like to tell us a bit about the single, double, and triple loop learning.
Yeah, thank you, Jordi. So, real-time evaluations, they support these different types of learning. The theory of loop learning was actually developed by Argyris and Sean since the 90s, 70s, and it's been evolving quite a lot. But the domain of that theory is organizational learning. So they inquired about how do organizations learn. And this has been applied in the domain of organizational development. And then, of course, evaluation as an important way approach to learn, it has been also gaining traction. So it's quite a widely used framework in organizational development and also in evaluation for organizational development. So the three loops, the normally organizations focus in the first loop of learning, the single loop learning, which is about identifying those deviations, discrepancies between the activities and the planned results, in order, with the objective, of course, to take corrective action and also, adjust the project or program implementation in order to achieve the desired results. So that would be the single loop learning. The double loop learning is here a double click on reviewing, checking the assumptions that inform the strategies or the theories of change that gave rise to the intervention. So it's about reviewing those assumptions and also making the judgments to the theory of change, which is underpinning the interventions activities. And there's finally the triple loop learning. Not yet many organizations actually dig into that loop of learning, but mainly is about reviewing, and that can be done ex post when the intervention is conducted. But in real-time evaluation, that is precisely one of the objectives, is having insight at the implementation of the intervention or the project or the program, reviewing how learning occurs. That means how are we learning as we go? And you check the learning processes by providing evidence on that use, and you reflect on the learning process so that you can also adjust that learning process during implementation. So that's here the meaning of triple loop learning in real-time evaluations. Jordi, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joseph. As you see, Joseph was mentioning a lot this element of learning as you go. That's why real-time evaluation can be so helpful in these triple types of learning. Thanks so much. So we saw a bit of a snapshot of what is real-time evaluation. Now, let's see briefly, why does it matter? And we hope that you share this approach. A real-time evaluation, why it matters? Well, it matters because there is an increasing interest. So it has been in the field of humanitarian projects over the last 20 years, but now this experience is starting to inform development. So in development, you see more real-time evaluations, agencies that do not do humanitarian work, but that are applying real-time evaluations. Why is this happening? Well, this is happening because we are in a context, when you are in contexts that are rapidly changing in terms of implementation, even if they're not humanitarian contexts. And here what you have, you can imagine, is the pandemic. The context changed immediately, very fast, and we needed to evaluate our response to a context that was unknown. We didn't know what worked, what didn't work. It was the first time that we encountered that situation. So how do you know whether things are working or not? A traditional evaluation is too slow. A traditional evaluation would be too slow. That is when real-time evaluation came in. We knew it from the humanitarian sector, but then all actors in the development community start to applying it, because it also enables you when interventions are brand new interventions are being designed and you don't know how they will work because it's the first time they're innovative, or it's the first time that you develop that intervention in a particular context. Real-time evaluation is a very good tool to use. Actually, so whenever you need evidence quickly to support learning in real time as you go, and you don't have much time and you need something fast, real-time evaluation is of the essence. So actually, that's why it matters, because the interest is increasing and we are moving into a context, a more volatile, turbulent context in which real-time evaluation could play a role. And we understand then that given the significance and scope of humanitarian action in UNFPA, which is increasing now with a particular division dealing with humanitarian action that has been newly launched, real-time evaluation may play a bigger role. So that is why we think it matters. Now let's see the how. Let's see the how. And in order on how to conduct a real-time evaluation, what we will see first is the main aspects or considerations that you should have in order to conduct one. And then we will provide you with the main guidance. There is plenty of guidance from the humanitarian sector on how to do them. So we will provide you those documents that help you going through the detailed steps of a real-time evaluation. So the thing is about the scope. Yeah, what is the scope of a real-time evaluation? And what you should consider is that usually real-time evaluations, it's applied to specific initiatives. Yeah, usually these initiatives have been traditionally the response to a humanitarian crisis, and that could be to a project or it could be to a program. Usually you don't use real-time evaluations to assess a policy, for example. It's very specific and initiatives. In terms of the timing, it's during implementation, and that's a very important point and a very crucial characteristic of real-time. You don't do real-time at the end of a project or after completion. That would be ex post or end of project evaluation. You do real-time evaluation is thought to be conducted during implementation as the implementation is unfolding. In terms of the duration, there's no specific prescription on what should be the duration of a real-time, but usually, and we will show you a number of examples, usually they are short, or they are short, but they're repeated in time over a longer period. So they iterate, you do a real time, and then after a few months, you do another real time, and then after a few months, you do another real time. When you do the real time evaluation, they tend to be short and then can be one-off or can be repeated over a cycle, right? But when you look at the evaluation itself, usually is not a very long evaluation. It's a rapid type of evaluation because you want rapid feedback. In terms of the purpose, yeah, this is taken from practitioners' experiences. Usually it's to support improvements, yeah, by those implementing, but it can also be used to learn lessons for the future. That's why it was used in the COVID pandemic. You see, agencies were testing whether their response to the COVID pandemic was working or not, and they needed rapid feedback in order to learn to expand that response. When you need a type of evaluation that allows you to learn while you are doing something very quickly, real-time evaluation can be a good fit. That's why the purpose is to draw lessons, then to expand or move on in other places. So usually a real-time evaluation, in most cases, is not the type of evaluation that you need for accountability purposes, for compliance. For accountability, you use a summative evaluation, like the CPE methodology that you have. Having said that, several agencies say that because real-time evaluation enables you to learn, it is a type of accountability as learning. So actually you are accountable. RTEs help you being accountable because you're proving that you are learning. You're not reinventing the wheel. With the money, from the taxpayers' money that you get and invest in the project, you are learning, and that is also a type of accountability. But from the point of view of compliance, you do not usually do real-time evaluations for compliance. You do them to learn. And then in terms of who conducts it, and that's a very specific element of real-time evaluations, it can be done by internal teams in organizations, internal teams that are separated from the implementers, right? Otherwise, that would be a self-assessment. But they are internal teams from the organizations, or you can use external teams, external evaluators, but that have to have a lot of knowledge about the contents, about the topic being evaluated. Why? Because it's very quick exercise. It is a very quick exercise, so there's not much time in order to learn what is going on. You just jump, collect the data, and have to interpret it. A few more aspects in terms of evaluation questions. Real-time evaluations, they do include evaluation questions, and they do include evaluation criteria. Without evaluation questions, there's no evaluation, right? Without evaluation questions, it wouldn't be an evaluation. So you need evaluation questions and use the type of methodology already used about gathering evidence for each one of the questions and doing like triangulation. Okay, you can also use learning questions. Yeah, if what you want to learn in real-time learning, you can also use learning questions. And usually this is the criteria, we put here the criteria used in humanitarian. Okay, but you can use other criteria as well. Appropriateness, relevance, connectedness, coverage, coherence, proportionality. These are the typical humanitarian criteria that are mixed also with development criteria that you already have in CPEs, in country program evaluations, like relevance, effectiveness, or sustainability. In terms of how the data is collected, the emphasis is on field visits, right? So if it's possible, you go and you talk to people in a real-time evaluation, you talk to the beneficiaries, you try to assess outcome and how impacts are generated So that's why it's very intensive usually in primary data collection through field visits and interviews. But now, as we go, there is also a lot of use of remote technologies like big data through mobile phones, lean data in Africa, for example, is used, or remote sensing that can provide data quickly as well. But the important thing is that this should be real-time data, because in real-time evaluations, you're assessing what is happening as you go. Okay, so there is a strong link between real-time evaluation and real-time monitoring. That is something that Valeria is thinking about for next year as well, including adaptive monitoring modules into this adaptive evaluation, so we can do the adaptive M&E together. In terms of the findings and how are reported, this is a characteristic, is rapid feedback to intended users, okay? So several agencies, they even use dashboards, which means that the evaluators collect the findings, they put them on a dashboard, and decision makers are seeing those findings as they are being collected. You see, so that's why it's also a collective exercise. Dashboards or face-to-face meetings with the decision makers. But here there's no delay. As you have the data, you interpret it, you analyze it together, and you try to make decisions fast or learn fast. That's the whole idea. So rapid, very rapid feedback. And in terms of the use of the findings, there is a lot of emphasis. The findings have to be used. I mean, real-time evaluation is about learning in action, learning to take a corrective action or learn to make some decision. Therefore, there have to be engagement between those evaluating and then those that will be using the findings. And usually this is done through sense-making exercise. Sense-making meaning making sense collectively of the evidence that has been gathered. Okay, so very often there is this co-development of recommendation to respond to the findings in real-time evaluations. These are the characteristics, okay, on the main aspects on the process. And there is one thing that is emphasized throughout, that is that real-time evaluation requires a very particular skill set, okay? Real-time evaluation does not only requires evaluators, whether internal or external, to be quick and to have knowledge about the topic, but it's also a lot about communication skills, because there is quite a lot of communication flows and quite a lot of engagement with the users. So it's communication skills and flexible mindset, because real-time evaluations happen in a way that is very fast. Things can change very fast. So actually evaluators, both internal or external, with a rigid mindset are not the right profile. You also see in this paper produced by Better Evaluation, by the Global Evaluation Initiative, by Patricia Rogers, just 2 years ago, that also mentions facilitation skill. Actually, this tool 17 box that I put here, this is the first ALNAP guide on real-time evaluations in 2009. They already mentioned that. And now, 10 years afterwards, Patricia Rogers says, yes, actually, over these 10 years, a lot of facilitation skills, emergent nature of evaluation design. So things will change while you are evaluating. So there has to be a flexible mindset. Divergent views are also typical in humanitarian settings. So it has to be evaluators that understand that there might be different divergent views, and we don't get stressed because people see things in different ways because they have different interests, right? So it's a lot about the mindset. We will talk about evaluators' mindset and facilitation skills in PILs 5 and 6 at the end of January, beginning of February next year. We will touch upon this. So now, if you think, wow, yes, I want to go this way, we would like to start thinking about a real-time evaluation, okay? How are the terms of reference? How do they look like? Let's go much more in detail. Here you have the first two documents are crucial. The first, I remind you, ALNAP is this Action Learning Network for Accountability and Performance in the Humanitarian Sector. They produced the first real-time evaluation guide for the humanitarian sector, mostly in the UN and related to UN agencies. That guide is for 2009, and it's only about real-time evaluation. In 2016, ALNAP produced the evaluation, the guide for evaluations of humanitarian action, and that includes real-time evaluation and also other types. You see, so actually the guide from 2016, it's expanded. It includes real time, but it also includes other type of evaluations that can be done in humanitarian action. Real time is one of the several types, but the one in 2009 only includes real time. Actually, everything that it said in the 2009 appears in the 2016. So actually both are, and you have here with the links direct access. As you can see in this 4.3, in the types of evaluations, they talk about real time in 2016. These are the two main guides, okay? And then there is also a document that I will mention in a second, that it's about the latest developments. There has been a development because of the COVID pandemic on real-time evaluation evolving to real-time learning, okay? And we have a document about that, but I will mention it in a second. If you want to see examples of real-time evaluations, here you have a list of examples of real-time evaluations. They're very small. If you want to see bigger, this is here you have the link, page 13 of these documents from Patricia Rogers, collected most of the evaluations that are good quality real-time evaluations conducted over the last 20 years in the humanitarian sector, most of them, but you also have a group from other development programs. And here what you have is UNHCR has done a lot, OCHA, WFP, the Interagency Standing Committee, which is the highest level platform we have on humanitarian action. UNICEF is also using them quite a lot. The FAO, Gavi, the Vaccination Alliance, and then Danida, the Danish, are using real-time evaluations a lot in their programs as well for quick learning. Okay, so here you have a number of examples. If you want a state of the art, if you want real-time evaluations that were conducted at the beginning of this year in 2022, you have this ALNAP, this network for humanitarian action. They have this database with a library and they have them all there. And if you put here in the research engines example of terms of reference for a real-time evaluation, you will find them here. Real-time examples of, I don't know, the Nepal earthquake, real-time evaluation of the response, and then the terms of reference. You can find everything here. Although in the guidelines that I presented in the previous slide, you also have templates for terms of reference, for reports of real-time evaluation, everything is in there, okay? And then something that we thought it was interesting is there is a guideline on real-time evaluation that was launched by UNICEF in 2019. And UNICEF, what UNICEF has done is they do not do humanitarian action, UNICEF. They are involved like you in UNFPA and UN Women, but they do not only do that. So they have found a niche for real-time evaluation, given the type of portfolio that they have. And they have come up with what they call the real-time evaluation plus. So as you can see in this figure at the bottom of the slide, they put all the type of evaluation types, and they say, okay, you have real-time evaluations, and then you have formative and midterm evaluations. And to them, real-time evaluation is right in the middle, is what they call the real-time evaluation plus. And it's a type of evaluation that does not only look at what is happening right now, they do look at what is happening right now and provide real feedback, but they also look a little bit forward. They do a formative exercise, okay, in terms of trying to anticipate what will come next. And they include that. So they adapted the spirit of real-time evaluation to what they need. And actually, we think that that could be interesting for you to have a look, because the idea with real-time evaluations is not that you apply real-time evaluations like OCHA is applying real-time evaluations, because you're not OCHA, you're UNFPA. So the idea is that you get inspired by what others do and then adapt real-time evaluation to the needs of UNFPA. Okay, and now going into the state of the art to close this section on real-time evaluation has been evolving to real-time learning. Okay, and that has happened during the COVID. So ALNAP, which is this action learning network on accountability and performance for humanitarian action, together with the UNEC, the United Nations Evaluation Group, they have been doing an exercise on reviewing what has happened during the COVID. Because during the COVID, the number of real-time evaluations increased a lot. But they had to be so quick and so fast that in many cases, not even real-time evaluations were enough to go as fast as it was needed during the COVID. That is why, besides real-time evaluations, some of the agencies were moving into real-time assessments, or what they call real-time reviews, which are an even lighter exercise than real-time evaluation. Because an evaluation, it's an evaluation because you have to have an analytical framework. You have to have an evaluation matrix. There have to be rigor in the methods that you use, right? But then when you don't have time in order to come forward with a design that has all these elements, you might do a lighter touch exercise. And that is what was happening during the COVID. So real-time assessment, real-time reviews, adaptive management reviews, or even after action reviews, which are very, very fast. You do an action, you do a retrospective assessment of what has happening, what have we learned quickly, and you move forward. Okay, so these type of assessments, they have analyzed those. They did a study. This is the document, the green one that you have here, from real-time evaluation to real-time learning. And they have come up that now what it's emerging in the sector is real-time learning. And as you can see in the orange figure, real-time evaluation is at the bottom, okay, would be the most consistent way of real-time learning, or the most, rather than consistent, will be the most complete. But then if you have to do something lighter and even faster, you might do a real-time evaluation approach, they call them, which is a real-time review or real-time assessment. If you have time to read experiences about this type of real-time learning exercises, this is in this document. If you don't have time to read, there was an event in February 2022 this year, ALNAP and the United Nations Evaluation Group, they did this event on real-time learning and real-time evaluation approaches during the COVID. And you have here, they share, it's in YouTube, here you have the link, and they share these experiences. Okay, so actually there are some presentations that last for 20 minutes, 30, 35 minutes, and you have these agencies explaining what is a real-time review and a real-time assessment and this lighter type of exercise. But just for you to know that because of the COVID, real-time evaluation is turning into other lighter, also other types of exercises, and all together is being called real-time learning. Now, Joseph, I give it over to you in order to assess the implications of real-time evaluations, not only the benefits, but also other types of implications.
Yeah, thank you, Jordi. Well, mainly here, we selected these two papers because the first one, it's an academic exercise. Actually, it was the result of reviewing 44 RTEs, so it's a meta-evaluation. And here you have an exercise published, a paper at the Journal of Multidisciplinary Evaluation. And the second one you have, it's from a practitioner point of view, is one of the agencies that Jordi mentioned, Danida, who has been also practicing with real-time evaluation and so forth. But mainly there are two major implications. The first one is that real-time evaluations are used for organizational learning. So the organization needs to have the resources and the capacities and the purpose in place, so that a strong orientation on learning, that's a major implication. And the second one is that this happens in the context of implementation. And so you provide learning feedback as you go. That's very important overall. And then it also allows you to capture to what extent you are achieving your results. So this is another important implication that is common in all real-time evaluations for all organizations. And that leads to a very important reflection that we would like to share with you, that is related actually to the program cycle. So real-time evaluations, and this happens for adaptive evaluation approaches in general, they challenge the traditional logic embedded in the program cycle. So in a traditional program cycle, you have design, implement, and it's a sequential, right? It's a sequential process where you design your interventions, you implement them, and then you monitor, and then you evaluate. In real-time evaluation does not work with that logic. Actually, what you do is that you evaluate as you implement. And then as you see deviations and you make corrections, you redesign the intervention as you go. So design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation happens simultaneously. So this is real-time evaluations and adaptive approaches to evaluation in general are types of evaluations that allow this rapid feedback and learning during implementation. And this is a major, and actually this is what DA Compass tries to combi. So you have here, the 4 phases, but those phases are circulating. So they are moving constantly. So there's a constant movement and interaction between the 4 phases of the program cycle, that they are not sequential anymore, but they happen simultaneously at the same time. And then there's a strong component, as you can see in the A Compass, of learning as the main driver. And of course, learning requires leadership, collaboration, and agility. So here you have the link with the A Compass and that implication that challenges that logic, and also it represents a paradigm shift in the way we evaluate and learn in organizations. Jordi, over to you.
Yeah. So actually, we have two tips, two things that we think that you should consider before jumping into real-time evaluation. we could not emphasize enough the fact that real-time evaluation is about observing in real time to make changes in real time, to make decisions in real time. In traditional evaluation, sometimes you do the evaluation, and then with the findings, you hope that the management or the organization or the implementers or the planners will make changes. Here, there's no hope. Here, there has to be a way of making changes. You do real time because somebody wants to make a change or take a decision, and they need rapid information in order to learn to make that decision, you see? So if you are in a moment or in an organization or in a particular setting where you don't know whether the findings will be used in order to make changes because of the decision-making process, for example, maybe real-time evaluation is not what you need. So consider that. Make sure that you're ready to make those changes, and then you consider RTE. And the second one is that RTEs are particularly useful in cases in which organizations or programs do not have what it's called a MERL. A MERL is a monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning system. Some organizations actually in Asia, in India and in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, plenty of organizations, they use MERL systems. They collect data constantly, and with that data, they answer monitoring questions. Yeah, how are we implementing? Are there deviations? They answer evaluation questions as well, and also research and learning. Research in terms of, does this method work better than another? And they learn. Okay. If you do not have that type of systems, that MERL, monitoring and research and learning system in place, an RTE can be a good substitute, because RTE actually focuses on learning in action, learning in real time. So if you don't have a MERL system, you can do deep dives with RTE in order to answer learning questions and type of evaluation questions. Okay, so this is actually in her work, Patricia Rogers mentioned that plenty of organizations that do not have MERL system in place, they use RTE. Now, if you have a MERL system, you might not need RTEs at all, because the type of questions you can answer with a MERL system is the same type you can answer with an RTE. Having said that, now we would like to know a bit about your experience. Okay, when we think about real-time evaluations, it's a very open concept, as we saw. A real-time evaluation, there is no one full definition. Real-time evaluations involve real-time data, real-time feedback, but also multiple cycles, the double loop learning, several aspects. So we would like to ask you if in UNFPA, so far, you have conducted any real-time type of evaluations or something similar. If you haven't, because you didn't need to, if you didn't do any real-time evaluation, but you will need to in the future, maybe because a donor is asking for it, or because you see that there is a need, or whether you're not sure, and then we would like to open the floor a little bit for discussion. So Valeria, Valeria now is putting up the poll, so if you can answer quickly.
Yes, colleagues, if you can, yeah.
Is this only in relation to UNFPA's work?
Yes, in principle, that's what we are interested in. Having said that, then now we open the floor. If you want to share experiences outside UNFPA, we'll be happy also to hear them. But yes, in principle, the idea is if you have used this in UNFPA.
Okay, we have 12 colleagues who have answered. Thirteen colleagues. Any other colleagues would like to answer? We have 14 answers. Should we close?
Yes, maybe we can share the results. Yeah, so everybody can see.
Okay.
Okay, so as you can see, Valeria has just shared. Half of you mentioned that you haven't done a real-time evaluation because you didn't need to. Then 1/3, 4 people, you say that you haven't, but you will need you or might need you in the near future. And then the rest are not sure. Would be very interested in knowing those of you that haven't, but you will need to do a real time, or maybe you need to do a real time evaluation. If you can share a little bit the context and why you will need to, and how you think that real time evaluation can help you. So now just feel free to unmute your mic and share your views.
We have a comment. Okay,
May I?
Leila,
Hi.
Yes.
do you want to? Yes.
Hi, Valeria. Hi, Jordi. Hi,
Hi,
Joseph.
how are you?
Hi, Oyuna. Hi, everyone. It's really good to see you, and thank you so much for this session. It's very interesting. I mean, for us, because we've been in kind of a development context for as long as I remember. I mean, doing a real-time evaluation doesn't only require agility and versatility from the evaluator, but also, I mean, from the project or the intervention, the program, the people who are running it. And I'm not sure if we really have working only with the government, being allowed to only work with the government. I'm not sure if we have that kind of versatility and agility for them to respond to this, or for our partners to have such a request at all. So what do we do to prepare them? So I wasn't sure which box to tick because we haven't. But it's not because we didn't need to or we need to, but because I'm not sure. This is why I had this comment. So the question is, how do we prepare our partners for that kind of, it takes a lot of quick response, and we usually don't have that. Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much, Ilanas. This is a very interesting point. Actually, here we might have opinions on this. This is something that you will answer. Actually, you'll answer it yourself. What we see is that actually real-time evaluation is that type of evaluation where there has to be a strong demand and there has to be capacity in order to do it. You see, when you say how you prepare them, if you have to prepare them, that might be already an indicator that the readiness is very important for developmental, for real-time evaluation, for timely feedback loops, because this type of adaptive methods to evaluation and learning imply a lot of engagement and imply a mindset and being agile and ready and wanting it, you see? So how can you prepare them? I don't know. I would say that if you really think that they need it, and it's a process, you see, it's a process. There has to be a process in which you create the demand for that type of real time exercise, and also, being very clear about what are the implications. The implications mean that there has to be iteration, you see, and the turnaround has to be quick. Otherwise, you continue doing the type of evaluations you are doing so far and people is used to. That would be my take. But we hopefully will get to know more once, if you start opening this conversation with your partners on real-time evaluation. But yeah, thanks so much. That's a very interesting comment. Yes, Lamo, Sherpa,
Yes.
please take the floor. How are you?
Thank you. We think that we think that we need to, because currently we are thinking of working closely with the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Authority to predict which is responsible for predicting the likelihood of disaster every season, and also prepare for relocation. And since we're also prepositioning, like reproductive health items and other things that are necessary, we think that it is, and since we also have a high prevalence of gender-based violence and unmet need, we think that real-time evaluation will be necessary to understand how we are supporting the women and girls in those locations. So we think that we will need to, and we're planning to do something with the mobile technology. I don't know how successful we will be, but let's see. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That's very interesting. Valeria, Joseph, would you like jump in if you have any replies or you want to add anything? Or anybody else would like to share those of you that have said that that you haven't. Some of
Ruda
you
has
ask.
a comment as well.
Okay.
Ruda, you want to share?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for the great session. I think it's really, I've learned a lot. I'm just wondering, yes, we have development in humanitarian context, and I think we could have done an RT in our humanitarian situation. Then considering the development, we have, I think we are testing a number of new models, innovations, but I'm also wondering how different it would be from operations research. That's number one. Then number two, in most cases, you find that we have got different outcomes that we are looking at. And for example, in one project that we are doing, we did a baseline assessment where we collected the baseline data for the outcome indicators. And now we are looking at conducting an end-line assessment where we will measure now the new what has happened after 3 years of implementation. So I'm just wondering, in terms of this evaluation, if we do it in the middle, of course, I know that we will do the focus group discussions, we'll do the key interviews, but in terms of data, can we also maybe consider like ways to bridge the gap and make sure we have ways to collect the data? How can we do it? Thank you.
Okay. If I may, on your first question about, how different is a real-time evaluation from operation research if you're already doing it? As you will see, if you look at that document and that workshop that we mentioned that happened in February about real-time learning, what you see we are in a full field where there are methods that overlap to one another. You see, when you look at the real-time assessment and one of these adaptive management reviews and a real-time evaluation, they very linked together. And sometimes applied research and evaluation, there is a gray zone. So it really depends on the type of questions that you're asking yourself. You might have an operations research type of unit that is answering the type of questions that the real-time evaluation can answer you. Absolutely. Actually, that is why I mentioned that in the literature, what we find in practitioners, we find that when you have a MERL, monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning system, maybe you don't need real-time evaluations because your research part of the system and your evaluation part of this real-time system that you have collecting data already answers the question. What I would wonder is in an operation research, you answer research questions, while in a real-time evaluation, you answer evaluation questions. And research questions and evaluation questions might be different. In terms of methods, they might be the same, okay? So this is just a consideration. You could be, maybe what you're doing, I would need more information in order to assess it, but probably 80% of what you're doing is already real-time evaluation. Okay, so actually the thing is that there is an overlap. They are all part of real-time learning. And in terms of the data, the sound is not very good, so I'm not sure that I got you 100%. But in terms of the data, yes, you said, well, data, there is a lot of real-time like field visits, focus groups, workshops that happen in terms of collecting first primary data from stakeholders, from beneficiaries, from users. But more and more, there is also a as we develop technologies for real-time monitoring data and remote monitoring data collection, all that is also incorporated in real-time evaluations, 100%. Actually, like with mobile data and remote sensing data, there is actually a guide that was launched, if I'm not wrong, in 2021 from PSD here in UNFPA about remote monitoring. And that remote monitoring guide already talks about, the possibilities of using remote data as well and technology in order to incorporate in real-time monitoring. But here the thing is, in a real-time evaluation, you use as much real-time data as you have. If you already have real-time monitoring data, of course you use it. Yes, but then because this is an evaluation, this is real-time evaluation, not real-time monitoring. So you use monitoring data, but you need the deep dive. you see, and the deep dive usually happens through interaction with final users. That's why you have the interviews and the focus groups as well.
Jordi, if I may, very quickly, there is also on the issue of the difference between operations research in that case and real-time evaluations, is that real-time evaluations also include in the process the decision-making process. So it's you collect data real time, and then you feed this data without delay. And then based on this data is discussed, is interpreted by decision makers, and decisions are taken in order to correct measures and adjust the intervention. So that's also a key particularity. Of course, you may say, if you have an operation research program and that research rapidly fits the decision-making process, then the overlap is more prevalent, right? So that I just wanted to make that comment, because I think it's a distinctive feature. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jose. Oyuna, you have your hand risen.
Yeah, thank you so much for this very interesting presentation and discussion. Just one reflection and maybe a couple of questions. I can definitely see that real-time evaluation can be applied in many contexts in our region because of the humanitarian nature of programming in certain areas, and sometimes we have a very sudden shift in the context and we completely move from development to humanitarian context, and without maybe even the mini research and learning system, as you say, set up for that humanitarian response. Or sometimes we have a lot of innovation, innovative programs or innovative interventions happening, and we not necessarily always assess its effectiveness or its use or sustainability, etc. So I can see a lot of avenues for us to see and pilot this real-time evaluation approaches in our region. I just wanted to ask about the management process, as Leilana was asking, in terms of, because if, let's say, we're going to do it in a very short period of time, how heavy is going to be the process for somebody who is hiring, external consultants and managing it versus doing it internally within the organization? So it will also have implications as well. And then also would love to see if the other regions have good examples of doing real-time evaluations in their programming. I'm not aware of any in our region, but there might be others that have done it, and it would be good to hear also if there are examples. Thank you.
Valeria?
Yeah, no, I
Okay,
don't
would
think
you-
there are any. I don't think there are any examples in any other region. In fact, yeah, I don't think at UNFPA we've ever undertaken one of these RTEs. But yes, it's definitely would be extremely interesting to be able to do one. So possibly next year or the year after, it would be good to consider it.
And if I may, Oyuna, in terms of which is a very, very relevant question about all the process that comes around, contracting, the administrative process, the arrangement. RTEs come from the humanitarian sector, right? And in the humanitarian sector, they have these express processes because they're working in humanitarian. Now, here your question is a spot on into you are in development, and the type of processes that you have are thought in terms of stable and development and traditional evaluations. Here you're talking about an evaluation that is not only different methodologically, but also in terms of the processes and the infrastructure that you need. It's much more adaptive. So actually, yeah, here we have attention. Absolutely, when you have to call, hire the contractors, but as we said, even during a real-time evaluations, things change. You see, maybe you have to do several loops because things are changing as you are doing the evaluation. And in the case of an innovation, and so there is a degree of flexibility that should be embedded. Agility in contracting, recruiting, and then flexibility in the terms of reference and also in the timings and in the contracting. And you might not have that degree of flexibility. So actually, incorporating real-time evaluations in UNFPA will most probably, and adaptive evaluation in general will include also a discussion and a debate on whether systems are in place to enable that degree of flexibility that these methodologies imply. that would be my take. Maybe Valeria, you would like to add, or Joseph?
Yeah, we would need to carefully examine the context. Yeah, and perhaps, yeah, the evaluation office could do one as well first. I think we have to go more in depth into this to really understand how we would be able to implement this type of exercise.
My humble experience, having seen others doing it, well, in the humanitarian sector, they use a lot of framework contracts, you see. So you have a framework contract with a group of companies or a consortium, and then you need real-time evaluators to come in. You issue a request for service, they come in, you see. So there are, you know, different ways of going about it, but contractually, it needs their ways of doing it. The thing is, you know, yeah, testing them and see what is the best for the organization. So anybody else? Is there any other questions or on real-time evaluation? You have all the materials and all these documents that we have going through the session in the folders, in the drive. The idea, as Joseph said at the beginning, is that now you go through these materials, you reflect more on this, dig deeper into this, and if you think that real-time evaluation or these elements of real-time evaluation could be interesting in your office to incorporate, then also let us know, because phase 3, the idea is that we can accompany you implementing all that, and you know, we can be like teaming up with you if you want to use those methods. So if there's no more questions, now we would like to move on to developmental evaluation. And developmental evaluation is very much linked to real-time evaluation, and to prove that, we would like to show you. remember that we said that real-time evaluation has 5 characteristics. These are the 5 columns that you have in this table. Patricia Rogers, in this paper that she did on real-time evaluation for adaptive management, she took different type of methods like real-time research, real-time monitoring, formative evaluation, process evaluation, action research, which could be linked to the operational research that you were mentioning, and then developmental evaluation, and so whether those characteristics are part of that or not. And as you can see, developmental evaluation has all the elements of real-time evaluation. So actually, developmental evaluation is a type of real-time evaluation, actually, and now we would like to move on this particular type, which has specific characteristics, okay? It's very much related to the innovation sphere, and actually, so maybe that will also answer, or Yuna, part of your question on the fact that you are moving on, you know, how to evaluate innovation and innovative experiences. So Joseph, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we will start now the block on developmental evaluation, because it's actually an evaluation approach that is gaining traction recently, and that is partially explained why is gaining that traction, because mainly because it's increasing the awareness that we are operating in complexity, and for 2 reasons. First, because interventions happen in complex environments that rapidly change. That's one of the main reasons. And secondly, because also the nature of the challenges, the sustainable development challenges that development agencies try to solve, this nature is complex. So those are complex issues, complex challenges, the domain of wicked problems. So what is developmental evaluation? Well, here you have, it's actually, to put it simply, it's a type of evaluation that informs and supports the development of a new initiative. And that connects to the innovation aspect that Jordi was mentioning. So it's related to the development of something new. And that may be a project, a program, a product, or an organizational development process. This type of evaluation, this approach was developed years ago by Michael Quinn-Patton, who is the author of this book. If you don't have time to go and read the book, which is highly recommended, you also have a 3-minute video where Michael explains very succinctly the approach. And there are other names for developmental evaluation. Some people call it adaptive, even real time, although it's more than real time. It's type of real time, but it's more, as we will see, action evaluation, emergent evaluation. But the main terminology, the concept is called developmental evaluation, and you have here all the stars. So developmental evaluation is, in a nutshell, this type of evaluation that informs the development of a new initiative. So there are 6 main characteristics of a developmental evaluation. The first one is that focus on the development of something new, and that's different from improvement or accountability or summative judgment. Second characteristic is that it takes place in complex dynamic environments that rapidly change. So developmental evaluation actually allows you to react and respond to the changes that you see in the environment or in new information coming in. The third characteristic is that feedback, for that reason, is rapid, is as real time as possible. It has to be timely with the decision-making process. The fourth characteristic is that the developmental evaluator, works collaboratively, works very close with the implementers, and that can be part of the intervention team. So there's an embedment. So evaluators, although they may be external, they are embedded into the implementation team, because and the evaluation happens in the context of organizational development in real time or timely. The evaluator also elucidates the innovation and adaptation processes, tracks their implications and results, and facilitates. It entails a lot of facilitation. Jordi explained that one of the main competencies of real-time evaluation is facilitation, and that also applies in developmental evaluation. There's a lot of facilitation for ongoing real-time and database decision-making during the developmental process, which is iterative. There are different timely feedback loops, as we saw in the previous pill, that are highly related to that process, to the decision-making process, fed by data and input of the evaluative process. And the final characteristic is that the DE itself becomes part of the intervention. So, and sometimes it's even an intervention in itself, in the sense that it influences the process of organizational development based on the intervention that is implemented. So those would be, in a nutshell, the main characteristics. And now, Jordi, why we need a developmental evaluation and when?
Yeah, actually, that's a very important point. Developmental evaluation, there is a hype with developmental evaluation. A lot of institutions now and organizations want to do developmental evaluation, but there is a niche for developmental evaluation, and you have to make sure that you get that right. Why are you doing a developmental evaluation? The answer to that question is fundamental. You cannot substitute summative evaluations for developmental because they have a completely different purpose, or even formative from developmental. So there is a niche for each one of them. This slide simplifies this quite a lot, but it's true. In a developmental, the focus is on assisting the development of something new. That's what it does. And as Joseph said, in a complex context. And innovation, usually, social innovation initiatives are at the core of that. So when you're developing something new, and you need information constantly, real-time data, in order to see if that works, if it doesn't work, and you have to tweak it, and you have to feed back into decision-making processes on this initiative that you're developing. Developmental evaluation is the right fit. But if you already have something that is ongoing and you just want to make improvements, you don't need a developmental. Then you can do a formative evaluation. And if you have been implementing a program for 5 years and you need to be accountable, you need to comply with the fact that you have to report on whether you have achieved the objectives that you said you would achieve, that it's a purely summative evaluation. You don't do a developmental, you don't need to. That would be a pure summative evaluation. So actually, developmental, formative, and summative, they complement one another. You see, when you start developing something, you use developmental evaluation. Then when that something is more or less established, but you want to tweak and make improvements, you think in terms of formative evaluation. And when you want to be accountable and assess whether that was worth it and whether you have achieved your objectives, you do a summative evaluation. So they complement in a cycle. They do not substitute one another. We have a flashcard. The flashcards are like one-pagers with some notes that can help you going through this process. And in that flashcard number 1, which is one of the folders that you will find in the drive, we have put the 5 types of developmental evaluation that Michael Quinn-Powter came up with when he developed the methodology. And as you will see, all these types of developmental evaluation have to do with different stages in innovation, in social innovation. And one of them have to do with evaluating in crisis, when there is a crisis. That's why in the COVID developmental evaluation, like WFP, UNICEF, they started using developmental evaluation to assess the response to the COVID, because response to the COVID was an initiative in itself that was new, because we had never had any response to the COVID in the past. So they started using developmental evaluations in order to accompany that process. Okay, so what we mean is that developmental evaluation is growing. When we did the developmental evaluation, when UNFPA did the RBM developmental evaluation, Michael Quinn-Patton referred to it as a transition-focused type of developmental evaluation. So it's a new style. And actually now WFP, in the response to the COVID, they did a retrospective developmental evaluation, which is another type. So actually, what we mean is that the methodology is quite open. Back to you, Joseph.
Yeah, thank you, Jordi. So how do you know it is a developmental evaluation? This is a fundamental question before we engage into developmental evaluation. And we have two ways here to assess two things. The first is assessing the fidelity challenge. So developmental evaluation is based on 8 principles. On the practice of 8 principles. Principles guide behavior, guide the action, how to conduct this type of evaluation. The first one is the developmental purpose, so that you make sure that you focus on developing, on providing input to developing a new initiative. The second one is the evaluation rigor, that you have all the elements of an evaluation that provide the rigorousness that is needed in any type of evaluation. The third principle is utilization focus. As we saw in the first pill, you make sure that you focus the evaluation to be useful for the primary stakeholders, and you may change, you know, the evaluation questions as priorities change, as you make it relevant for the final users. The fourth principle is the innovation niche, which is linked to the first one. So as you are developing a new initiative, you make sure that what you are developing becomes an innovation in itself. Then we have the fifth and the sixth principles that are related, which are complexity, perspective, and systems thinking. Complexity perspective is making sure that you use elements of complexity theory to be aware of the complexity in which you are operating. And then here it comes systems thinking. Systems thinking is a root word for complexity. It is mainly a way of thinking that allows you to devise ways to respond to that complexity. We will see that in the next pill next week. So next pill will be about methods to capture complexity and go over it. So we will focus on that next week. The seventh principles is the co-creation. So in a developmental evaluation process, that's why actually the evaluators are embedded and become part of the implementation team, because there's a quite deal of co-creation between the evaluators, the decision makers, and therefore the primary and secondary stakeholders. And in that process of co-creation, one of the essence and that connects with real-time evaluation is that actually there's a lot of timely feedback that is provided through iterative timely feedback loops, and that feeds into the decision-making processes, as we saw in the last pill. And then once you know that what you're doing is a developmental evaluation, and before you go over it, the next question is, are we ready for it? Are we in our organization ready for a developmental evaluation? Because it also implies certain capacities and resources and culture inside the organization and the evaluation function. So here there's the developmental evaluation diagnostic checklist that has been quite recently developed by Mark Kavash, who was actually the one who conducted the quality assurance of the developmental evaluations conducted in UNFPA. So how different is a developmental evaluation from traditional evaluation approaches? Of course, it requires a lot of methodological flexibility. There's no prescriptive step-by-step because it's based on actually the application of the principles which you just saw. It's not a step-by-step process. And there are certain differences, as you can see, but mainly we would like to highlight 5 aspects. First, the embeddedness, that evaluators and the evaluation team become part of the implementation team. So that's of an important characteristic compared to a traditional evaluation. It's very utilization focused, so that you are very much focused because you have a direct and constant iterative interaction with the final and primary users. you are adapting, the evaluation to the intended use of that evaluation, and that is changing. You need some flexibility in order to adapt to this. One of the key and critical dimensions for this adaptation is providing this rapid real-time feedback that allows you to capture that pulse so that you can correct, adapt the evaluation as you go. And we will see later on a technique for doing that with the adaptive inquiry frameworks. You also focus on capturing what's unfolding. We talk about emergence in the previous spiel. So when you are very much evaluating in the present moment, you can actually capture what is emerging, and you can react and even anticipate to what is happening in the field. And it also entails the application of systems thinking, as mentioned, and creative and critical thinking as three ways of thinking that allows us to understand the complexity in which we operate and also quickly respond to it. So that would be, in a nutshell, the main difference between developmental evaluation and other traditional approaches to evaluation. So in the next slide.
Yes, 1 second, Joseph.
Oh, yes,
just to let people know that these pills, this drawing of pills, that refers to the first pill that we did 15 days ago. So real feedback loops are included in that one. And number 3 on systems thinking is the next one. So the next pill will be on systems thinking methodologies. So it will cover this part. Sorry, Joseph, back to you.
Okay. So how to conduct developmental evaluation? And you have here some interesting resources with plenty of inspiration for doing that. Mainly the developmental evaluation, and that's an important message, it's a principle-based approach. So it's not prescriptive. There's no a single standard step-by-step methodology on how to do it, but you can find a lot of resources. The main one, it's like the seminal place for finding those resources is the Developmental Evaluation Institute that was actually founded by Michael Patton and Mark Kavash. So you have here the access, you have a lot of resources and examples on how to do that. And then there are also other resources. Developmental evaluation was actually an approach that was initiated and practiced by private foundations. Private foundations, of course, they are different from UN agencies, especially because they are the own funders and they don't have that pressures to account, as UN agencies have. So that's an important difference. But the McConnell foundations, they develop a developmental evaluation primer with interesting theoretical and practical examples. Then the practitioner's guide to the developmental evaluation process, as you have here. And then there are agencies like the USAID, which are a different territory of developmental agencies that also they are adapting and creating their own guides to developmental evaluation. And you have here the example of USAID, which is quite recent. So those, please check them. And because when we conduct developmental evaluations, we will explain now, as it was the example of UNFPA, that UNFPA was the first agency in the UN system to conduct one. So then as you go and practice the developmental evaluation, you target it according to the needs and also the organizational culture you have in your agency. So who is conducting this? Well, you have in the developmental evaluation exemplars in that book a collection of different examples, many coming from private foundations working on the domain of social innovation, which is actually the territory where developmental evaluation started. We've mentioned the example of USAID, that they also have a guide because they conducted developmental evaluations during COVID on how to do it remotely, because it changes quite considerably, because there's a lot of engagement with users, a lot of timely feedback loops that required sometimes, as it was in our case, because we started the developmental evaluation before COVID. We also continued during COVID, and the way we capture data and we engage with the stakeholders is different, of course. And then in the UN system, UNFPA was the first agency, started in 2019 with the RBM developmental evaluation. That was a corporate type of evaluation. And in 2021, at the ICARO region, actually evaluating the next program, as we will mention right away. There's been also other experiences. Actually, it was interesting that when we conducted that developmental evaluation, that raised a lot of interest. Valeria, Jordi, and I have been also sharing the case in other agencies, as it was the case in UNICEF and the World Food Program, for example, and they have developed also their own types of evaluation. And now we will focus on the examples. We have 2 examples in UNFPA in this agency. So we think it's worth sharing those 2 examples. You can see how the 2 are really focused on developing a new initiative, so that they have a developmental purpose right since the beginning. And in the case of the first RBM developmental evaluation, the purpose was to provide evaluative input to the development of a new stage or era of RBM at UNFPA. So that was the particular purpose. In the case of the ICARO, it was assisting in the co-creation and the innovative development of the regional program, of the next regional program that was set in motion this year, and incorporate that learning into based on the previous program. So that was also the focus, the developmental purpose of this type of evaluation. So Jordi, if you'd like to share with us
Yes.
some insights on the first corporate developmental evaluation.
Yes, and then Valeria will talk about the ICARO one. I will go a little bit fast because this developmental evaluation was a corporate one. So it was about results-based management system across UNFPA. So many units inside business units were involved. The reason why we are here today, it's a consequence of that evaluation. And actually, Joseph and I, or Valeria, we never recommended adaptive management to anybody. It was UNFPA that decided to go that way. And that was part of the impact that the evaluation had in the organization. And actually, this is part of this green box that you have here on the gains and the benefits. The developmental involved a lot of timely feedback. So we were feeding back as we were answering the evaluation questions, we were feeding back into the organizations. And then rather than telling UNFPA what to do, we were sitting down in these timely feedback loops, discussing with UNFPA the evidence that we had covered. So we were facilitating discussions, putting in the discussions in, and those discussions and these meaningful conversations that also happened between human resources and PSD and the evaluation office, they led to the change. So actually, this is one of the good points that developmental evaluation has: more engagement, more interaction, more impact in the organization. It increases collaboration among business units in the organization that you're doing the developmental in. That's the point number 6. And also the learning stays inside the organization. In a typical evaluation, the learning stays a lot in the evaluator team. So actually what you have is a final report, which is the consequence and the result of all that learning that evaluators accrued by collecting and analyzing the data. Here, the data, once you collect it, you throw it into the organization and you analyze it together. There is a process of deep engagement. That's why learning stays inside, and that means high value for money. Okay, so these are some of the benefits. And one last one that we will be putting a lot of emphasis on in next week is on systems thinking. Systems thinking has a very, very practical implication, and is that it allows you to talk about these wicked problems that Joseph was talking about, and about bottlenecks in the organization without a blaming and shaming attitude that usually summative evaluations involve. You see, summative evaluation is, oh, you're not effective enough, you're not efficient enough, here is the bottleneck, here is the problem. When you use systems thinking, you put the problem on the table in a different way. There's no blaming and no shaming. We will be talking about that next week. So these will be the advantages. But then we also wanted to highlight that there are challenges to a developmental evaluation. And here you have a few of them. The fidelity challenge is the first one. Sometimes it's very difficult to know if you're doing a developmental evaluation or a formative evaluation, in fact, and that has different implications. That's why this fidelity challenge that Joseph mentioned is very important to have into account. Also finding consultants. Why? Because developmental evaluation is pretty new. Most of the consultants in developmental evaluation come from the social innovation sector, private foundations in the United States. So it's difficult. There's not still a full army of developmental evaluators. We are getting trained and acquainted with the methodology as we go. The organizational understanding, the approach to developmental is different from summative and formative. So actually, there is a lot of engagement and co-creation, and the organization has to understand that. And usually organizations in the UN system are used to evaluators tell me what I should do, give me recommendations. Yeah, here you have the point 7 here as a challenge. There are action points in a developmental evaluation. There's no recommendations. So that's a shift in mindset. The organization should be mature enough to take responsibility for what are the next actions. It's not for the evaluator to put recommendations in a report. That's the idea. Embedding the evaluators inside the organization, that's also another challenge, because external evaluators become embedded evaluators in a developmental. You see, it's not, you're not looking for the objective point of view. No, evaluators have a skin in the game. They are part of the process. This is an intervention. So how you embed them may be a challenge. Flexibility, and that has to do with Oyuna's question before in real-time evaluation. When you said, okay, what about contracting, hiring? Here it was the same thing. There had to be a high degree of flexibility. The timeline for the evaluation was expanded. You don't know how many feedback loops you will have to do. You don't know how many trips to New York or how many trips to regional offices, because everything is emergent, right? So you have to be ready for a high degree of flexibility. And then also the fact that usually there's no reports in developmental evaluations, but in the UN, you need reports for accountability. So how do you solve that? Yeah, Valeria solved it through an account report in which we did the account of what had happened with evaluation, but then we produce feedback notes with all the critical analysis, because developmental evaluations are about learning. So you have to separate those. The quality assurance of the developmental evaluation is also a thing. We had the luck that Valeria hired Michael Quimpatton, which is the one that developed the whole methodology. He was the quality assurer. So we had a quality assurance mechanism, but you need it, and sometimes it might not be easy to find it. And then linking the evaluation itself with the results of the evaluation are an organizational development process. How you make that link is also one of the challenges. So this is about the developmental evaluation of results-based management in UNFPA. Then there was a regional one in ECARO. Valeria, if you would like to take the floor and tell us about it.
Yes. After we did the developmental on RVM, there was a lot of interest from ECARO, and they wanted to do a developmental. So they wanted to do one in one of the cycles when they were not conducting sort of an RPE of the regional program. So the program had already gone to the board, so they wanted to conduct one to inform sort of the action plan. So the program was there, but they wanted to inform the action plan. So that was the first one that we did ever at decentralized level. And of course, it was challenging because Mahbub, who was the advisor, had to manage it himself, and he had never conducted a developmental before. So we did support him on this exercise, but also there was quite a big mindset change that had to happen. They needed a lot of commitment, not only from the office, but from the country offices that were in the working groups, because it had to be very participatory. So that was one thing. And also giving everyone a voice as well, right? Not only, it wasn't only sort of the regional office having, or senior management having a voice, but it was everyone participating, including all the countries. That was also another challenge. Also the challenge of using, well, collecting the data and having these evaluators. We managed to get one evaluator who was knowledgeable of developmental and two others that had never done it. So there was a bit of a learning curve there with the consultants, but they were embedded, and they managed to do 2 feedback loops. Also with the challenge of the change in mindset of using the information right away, real time. So they did manage to collect the data, feedback the information, make decisions. They did go back and look at the previous program and what learnings, what challenges, gaps, and they looked at several areas of where they wanted sort of to innovate or to adapt and develop differently, in the implementation of a program. So I think it was a very useful exercise for them. They were happy with the results. Of course, they had challenges because it was the first time it was ever done. but yeah, it was eventually very highly participatory and dynamic. And then, of course, the whole change of the report also was different. So there was a change in that. But it was a useful report. I will share the report internally. This report did not go to the board, as it was not sort of like an RPE type of exercise. So there was a lot of learning with this exercise. So just, yeah, some issues to keep in mind. Obviously, it's not that easy still to find not very expensive evaluators that are experts in DE. That there's a growing number of them. There is quite an intense work commitment for the period to be able to absorb and to participate and absorb all the findings and make decisions, right, from all the participants, from, in this case, a regional office and the countries. Probably the cost is would be a bit higher, just because of the types of evaluators that you would need to hire, and it might be longer than a normal CPE, depending on how many loops, how long you are going to have the evaluators embedded. And in fact, Mahbub wanted to have them to have a longer exercise, but then because of, you know, they had to stop it at that point, so it lasted a certain number of months. In the meantime, they had to change the contract, because originally, in a sense, they only had planned for one feedback loop, and then they realized, no, we need more feedback loops to make decisions. So after first feedback loop, it's like, okay, but then we need more information. We want to go deeper into this area. So they had more data collection, analysis, and a second feedback loop and decisions. So that's why they had to also, the contract has to be flexible, right? To make decisions on the go, even flexibility in the evaluation approach. And also, they even changed the questions. They had an adaptive inquiry framework as well. Well, I think, yes, it was a very useful exercise. You have to understand it's a bit more challenging, but and the evaluation manager, in this case it was Mahbub, has to be ready to take that on and to sort of, in a sense, defend the principles and stick to the principles of developmental evaluation, the ones that Joseph mentioned at the beginning, to sort of to have it really be useful and to be a real developmental exercise, not just like a summative or change into something that it shouldn't be. But if, well, I'm a fan of this type of approach. At least when we did it, it was extremely enriching and useful, very utility focused exercise, and very, very real time, and it had a massive impact. So I think it's a very, very good approach, and I think we have to look into it and be brave and try to innovate with support. Obviously, we're always ready to support if you want to implement this type of approach. I don't know, Jordi and Joseph, do you want to say anything else?
Yes, well,
yeah.
Yep, Joseph. Yeah.
No. Well, I just wanted to mention. Thank you, Valeria, for that. That to us, one of the particular things that makes this so special, and distinctive, and we've been reflecting upon that, is the high degree, as you, Valeria, said, of user engagement, and that's particularly fundamental. And for doing that, because I mean, how busy stakeholders are, how difficult it is to engage them, right? And to us, it's very important to make a strong case for why developmental evaluation is the most appropriate approach. Why is it needed? What's the value, for the organization, for the stakeholders? That means making also very succinct, short, brief, compelling pitch about what the developmental evaluation is and why it's needed here. So, and that brings actually to one of the most important things for us, which is the feedback loops, those timely feedback loops, as we discussed last session. You need that user engagement. You need stakeholders to, to be excited, to come and share and interpret and discuss the findings in those feedback loops. And when you have that in place, then you have the conditions, you have the ingredients for having, organizational learning, to capture that learning. And that learning is key, that in order to feed the decision-making processes, which in return, it's the process that allows you to have the value and see and visualize and make visible the value that this approach is bringing to the organization. As Jordi mentioned, right, adaptive management and the fact that we are developing these adaptive evaluation approaches is actually an outcome of that, and that entails a lot of intense engagement with users in order to understand a complex system. And that's something, Valeria, Jordi, that it was critical for us, was the application of this systemic analysis, which in a nutshell was about being aware of the interrelationships between the different components that make up an RBM system. Bringing different perspective or different users that see the system in different ways. That was fundamental for having that engagement. Bringing perspective, hearing the different voices, and also, involving them in the decision-making process. And the third one was also be clear about having a discussion on what are the limits, what are the issues that limit what we can do. This is about talking about the boundaries. So then we are not frustrated for the things we cannot do. So talking about that, it was also fundamental, and that means bringing the systemic analysis. And adaptive inquiry framework was a tool which Jordi will mention now, which was very also important. It's a tool very easy to do, but so fundamental for being rigorous in conducting this evaluation, as evaluation questions change over time, and that's part of an adaptive evaluation approach. And in the end, for all those reasons we have mentioned, the evaluation becomes an intervention in itself. So it influences the way the evaluation is conducted, it influences the way the intervention is conducted, and it influences the way the whole organization is evolving and developing. So that's to us, because that's a reflection, a retrospective we did, the three of us, with also Michael Quinn-Patton, and we presented that also in some evaluation conferences. That was fundamental. I don't know, Jordi or Valeria, if you'd like to add anything here.
Yes, that sometimes there are gray areas, and that came out when we're doing a developmental, because it's principle based. Sometimes it's difficult to say, okay, is this a developmental evaluation or is this a formative evaluation? There are great areas, and with this slide we try to answer this question: what really makes it distinctive? As Valeria said before, feedback loops. So there's no developmental evaluation without feedback loops into decision making. If that's not happening, that's a no-go. Then you're doing a formative maybe. But feedback loops are of the essence, and organizational learning, these are the two parts. That's why a lot of engagement. And actually, this is what makes you ready for a developmental evaluation. If engagement is not possible, if people is too busy, if decision makers cannot be engaged, maybe it's not a developmental evaluation what you need. Because as Valeria said, it has a huge impact. It makes a huge difference, but it's also more costly, and it's costly overall because it needs much more engagement. So there has to be strong motivation and a strong capacity. And actually that has to do, Josep, if you would like, with this couple of finalizing tips.
Yeah, just in a nutshell, because that's a highlight. That's something we've been mentioning along. But we have to make sure now that developmental evaluation is actually what we need, depending on the purpose we are following, and also that the conditions to conduct developmental evaluation are in place. So both the fidelity challenge and the diagnostic checklist are of the essence to conduct at the design phase of the evaluation. And then that was something that we learned on the go, and here I think Valeria did a great job in making sure that to put the contractual and administrative flexibility in place. in terms of timelines, contracts, budget, that was of the essence. Jordi and I, because we are independent external evaluators, we are also busy conducting other assignments. So because we were so excited about this developmental evaluation approach, we were all learning with Valeria. We felt part of the team, and that for evaluators, that's so important, because sometimes we feel like aliens, right? That work externally. So feeling also having that belongingness was so important for us, and also we make at least our best to make sure that we could adapt to that flexibility that was required. So that's two important tips for us that are of the essence when implementing and making sure that the developmental evaluation can be conducted as its approach says, no? Making sure the 8 principles are in place. Jordi, over to you.
Yes, yeah. So actually, that's everything so far on developmental evaluation. UNFPA has plenty of experience and expertise now with developmental evaluation. So reach out to Valeria, to us, if you have more questions and more aspects. If there's any pressing question that you would like to put us forward on this, please go ahead. Otherwise, we just need now 5 minutes to mention these adaptive inquiry frameworks, because Valeria has mentioned them, Joseph has mentioned them. So we will show you, it's a very easy technique, but very relevant. And then we will finalize with the course with a quick survey to know what are the chances that you would like to apply this, in order to have an idea on whether we will have to accompany you at some point. Okay, if there's I don't see any hand up. But remember, if you have questions later on developmental evaluation, reach out to Valeria or to Joseph and I. Okay, so adaptive inquiry frameworks, they have appeared here in the context of developmental evaluation in both cases. In the case of the developmental evaluation of the RBM system and the ECARO one. We will see what these are. Last week, we also talked about adaptive inquiry frameworks when we talk about ensuring use and timely feedback loops. So adaptive inquiry frameworks are very related to this. Here, when we say inquiry framework, because we're talking about evaluation, we're referring to evaluation matrices. So the evaluation matrix, adaptive evaluation matrix. But inquiry frameworks refers also, maybe you have a learning framework, or maybe you have a monitoring framework. You could also adapt those. So in a MERL system, monitoring, evaluation, learning and research, you might have different inquiry frameworks, one for monitoring, one for evaluation, one for research, okay, and one for learning. And you could adapt them as well. Here we will focus on evaluation ones. So actually, what is an adaptive inquiry framework is very simple. It's a tool that has the goal of ensuring that the evaluation questions reflect the needs of the users. You want the evaluation to be used. And in a developmental type of evaluation, in adaptive evaluation, you want the evaluation to fit into decision-making and to fit into adaptation decisions. So you want to make sure that when you're collecting data about those priorities of the users at any moment in time. And what happens, as we saw 2 weeks ago with emergence in evaluation, is that the context changes and the priorities might change as you are doing the evaluation, especially in volatile or turbulent or changing contexts. So in those particular contexts, you might need to adapt the evaluation matrix, because the problem is when you have an evaluation matrix that has questions that are not up to date, they don't reflect the priorities of the users, okay? Now, in order to do that, you need to track those changes and adjustments. So an adaptive inquiry framework is not an improvised inquiry framework and you start deleting questions and adding questions without any tracking process. That wouldn't be the way. You need a transparent tracking procedure, and that's what adaptive inquiry framework offer in order to make sure that evaluations are focused on use, utilization, focused evaluations, which is developmental evaluations are real-time and are utilization focused. That's why they use adaptive inquiry frameworks, okay? The why is exactly what I said. When evaluation questions become outdated, you might be gathering data about aspects that are not relevant anymore for the users, okay? So even if when you're answering to an evaluation framework that it's out of date, you're wasting money. Essentially, that's what you're doing. Because you will answer to those questions, you will put them in a report, but they will be used by no one. So actually, when you are in an adaptive context, you have to make sure that the evaluation matrix reflects the needs of the users. That's what an adaptive evaluation will help you. Adaptive inquiry framework, sorry. So the adaptive inquiry frameworks are very much linked to the timely feedback loops. Yeah, feedback loop is you provide feedback on the needs of the users, right? And then in that feedback loops, new needs and priorities might emerge. You capture them and you put them into the inquiry framework. And yesterday we also talked about emergence. So last week, for those of you attending 2 weeks ago, sorry, you start an evaluation with an original inquiry framework, and then in a developmental evaluation or in an adaptive evaluation, you have feedback loops, several. In the developmental evaluation of RBM, we had plenty of them. In the ECARO one, there were 2. So it's not only one final report, there are feedback loops, there are decisions being made, and then the report comes at the end. And in these feedback loops, users might tell you that there are new priorities, or maybe there are questions that do not need to be answered anymore because they are not relevant because the context has changed. You see, so changes, and you can see here, you start with the original one, and then you adapt the framework as the context changes, okay? Context change and feedback loops, so you are adapting it. So you adjust it. How can you adjust it? Well, the way we used, for example, in the RBM evaluation is to use evaluation logs. Yeah, so you track each one of the questions. It's not just a matrix as an annex to the inception report and you forget about it. It's an alive evaluation question, should be alive. So you have a log for a question. For each one of the questions, you have the question, of course, and then who are the users, the sources information, the data collection methods, and then you track what type of question is. And we identified 4. You know, this is not prescriptive. This is a tool that you have there, according to the experience that we had with the RBM developmental evaluation, but you can create new types of questions. The important thing is that you track them. All this information is in the A Compass. If you go into the A Compass, the Adaptive Management Model Compass of UNFPA, on page 35, you have a link to the toolkit, and tool number 10 is Adaptive Inquiry Framework. So all these graphs and explanations on what that is, it's included in there. But here, so one take to it is that you divide questions between original questions that were at the beginning of the evaluation framework and they don't change, questions that are dropped because they are not a priority anymore, questions that shift, the focus of the question might be shifting because the priorities of the intended users change, and then emerging questions, questions that are completely new. Here we have a couple of examples from the developmental evaluation on RBM. We had one of the questions that was a very important one that was agreed at the beginning is, what is the range of options available to articulate an RBM conceptual framework? Because the idea was, okay, let's move to the new era of RBM. So what are the different options? And as part of this question continued, and you can see in the box below, saying that we should look, evaluators, at the basic pillars to include of the conceptual foundation of an RBM policy and an RBM strategy. So we had to answer this question in order to feed back into an RBM policy and strategy. But right at the middle of the evaluation, PSD decided they didn't want to go for an RBM policy or strategy because the evidence that we were bringing in was saying that other organizations were not going for that because that had a number of implications. So then this question was shifted. Yeah, we shifted, as you can see, it was a shifting question. So it was modified from the original form, and we took out of the question all that part about the RBM policy. This is an example, but this was tracked, you see, this was tracked, and that it's shareable with everybody. Another example is an emerging question. This question was never part of the initial inquiry framework. And in one of the feedback loops, one of the deputy executives director in UNFPA said, well, we're working on, there is a new UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework. Now you're very acquainted with it, but back then in May 2019, this was just being launched. Actually, it was not even launched that we learned that adaptive programming was part of a number of articles. And the executive office asked us directly, it's a priority now to us to see what are the implications for UNFPA of incorporating adaptive programming. So this became a focus priority question. Okay, so we dropped others and we put that right in because the user of the developmental evaluation, one of the main users, PSD and the executive office, wanted this as a priority. Okay, so we agreed that. We agreed that, and we put that as a question. You have another example, which is the formative evaluation of the Innovation Fund, of the Innovation Initiative in UNFPA, that it was a formative evaluation that also used an adaptive inquiry framework. Okay, that was a formative. It was not a developmental, but it used an adaptive inquiry framework. You have another example there. That one was done in 2017. So here, in terms of tips, it is important that you make sure that the inquiry framework is alive, yeah, that you update it as changes occur. So when you look at the evaluation matrix, it always reflects the priorities of the users, always at any point in time. And then it's also important that there is an agreement on the changes that you do on those questions. That has to be agreed. You can use the evaluation steering group or the evaluation action groups in the developmental in order to agree that. And the rules of adjustments should be agreed right from the start, because you have to be very careful with changing. So an adaptation to the inquiry framework is acceptable as long as that reflects a change in priorities of the user. But if it changed a mistake in that particular question in the way it was formulated, or if it reflects a political interest in not addressing a particular aspect, then that's not acceptable, right? So that's why this is so important, to agree on the rules and to make it transparent. So then when the quality assessment is done by the evaluation office on the evaluation, they can look at that. They can look at that particular assessment. So that's what an inquiry framework is. The tool is there in the Adaptive Management Compass. And that would be it so far for the session. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. We actually have a question for you, which is this Survey Monkey. It's 2 minutes in order to get your feedback, mostly on what do you think out of these methods we have seen today, which ones you think you will apply or you might apply in the future, because that will give us a bit. We want to follow up on these sessions with a technical training next year. So we would like to see which countries are interested in what type of method. So if Valeria will now share, or has already shared, maybe yes.
Yeah, I shared, Jordi. I think Oyuna had a question there in the chat.
Okay. Let me read it. Or Oyuna, if you want to put it forward.
Yeah, it's something that you may want to respond later for the next session, because I know it's very late for you and we're running out of time. But I wanted to ask, in case where the foresight scenario, very complex external environmental changes that we need to integrate into programming as well as in evaluation, is the development evaluation a better approach? So that was my question, from the systems thinking or complexity principles that you have discussed over.
Okay. Yeah, maybe Joseph.
Yeah.
You would like to, yeah.
Yeah, well, no, that's a very interesting question. Well, for the design of the program, you don't need an evaluation. You can directly, right, apply foresight scenario. Actually, this is a very important component in the adaptive management model. As we see adaptation in UNFPA, we talk about that. But then if you want to make sure, for example, if the purpose is the development of the new program, then a developmental evaluation approach actually allows you to do that. You can actually evaluate. We call that process feed forward. So you bring that information also into the evaluative process, as long as you have an inquiry, right, that wants to put the attention on the foresight part of an evaluation process that will actually provide the feedback, to the design of that new program. So I think that in that case, a developmental evaluation approach could be an approach that would allow you to do that, because you bring the timely feedback as you are developing the program. I don't know whether Oyuna have answered this question. We will touch upon that also next session, because we will see also ways to capture that complexity.
And if I may, if you look at the purpose of the developmental, actually, Joseph introduce that here. For the developmental evaluation of RBM, on the left of the slide, you see that the purpose was to provide useful input into the development of a new. And to do that, we did a retrospective assessment. We looked back at the root causes and the problems and why, and we use systems thinking to analyze those pervasive problems. Because UNFPA said, don't tell me what the problems are, I already know. Tell me what are the root causes and how can we change that? And we also brought evidence and for scenarios and options, you see? So that anticipatory part was also part of the developmental looks back, looks right at the moment and looks also future. So one of the tasks that Joseph and we had to do is we went out of UNFPA to the UN system and beyond to see what was coming, what were the trends in the development sector in terms of RBM, and we brought that information in, and that is when UNFPA decided to move towards adaptive management. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Very good questions. Thanks so much, Ayuna. And then maybe Valeria, as our colleagues are answering the question,
Yeah.
maybe we could talk about next. Mhm.
Yeah, if you could answer the little, it's a very, very short survey, that would be great. Just stay tuned for the last session for this year. I think it's the 14th of December for Asia, right? Because it's a
Oh yes, yes, we will do.
yeah,
so
that
the
is the
first- yeah.
session. That session is on the morning, my morning, the 8 a.m. New York time, but for you, I think it's going to be 14th of December at noon. So yeah, and this PIL number 3 will be methods to capture complexity, and we're going to look at creative tensions, the iceberg model, and causal feedback loop diagrams. And then always remember that you have the drive where you get all the materials and the recordings, and also the materials to prepare for the upcoming sessions. And then for next year, 2023, date to be determined, but probably we'll try to do it in February if most regions are busy during January. We'll have the 3 other PILs, methods to capture contribution in unpredictable environments. And there we'll talk about outcome harvesting, which some offices are already starting to do, strategy testing, and then PIL 5, leadership roles in adaptive evaluations, and PIL 6, adaptive evaluation mindset. So I think it's, yeah, very, very interesting. And well, we're looking forward to everyone learning. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to write, or any suggestions or ideas, or you want to look forward more in depth into possibilities of implementing this type of exercises. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to Jordi and Joseph as well. It's early there in Barcelona. Well, it has been a pleasure. So thank you so much.